Good morning and welcome to this gathering focused on moving away from rhetoric, how to systematically include youth in peace and climate action. I'm Jimena Leiva Roesch from the International Peace Institute, and I would like to welcome you all to this event. To start us off, I would like to first give the floor to IPI's president, Said bin Raad, for some opening remarks. Said, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, dear friends, good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening. On behalf of IPI and its brilliant staff, I welcome you warmly to this discussion. I'm joining Jimena in doing that. Today's event is taking place 2 days before the US Climate Summit. It's not by coincidence, rather it's by design we convened this gathering, as youth have been demanding greater ambition, leadership, and transformation of our societies in order to address in our times, and not tomorrow, the climate emergency we are facing. The urgency to tackle climate change is acute. As we know that global mitigation efforts are well below the needed scale of transformation. The impact of COVID-19, instead of being a lever for greater climate action, has also, in most cases, only reinforced and stimulated business as usual practices, pushing us further behind. Today, we have, in absolute terms, the largest population of youth in humanity's history. What kind of planet will they be inheriting? A world where blowtorch-like heat waves will become possible sometime mid-century? Will that be our ignominious legacy to this generation? A new partnership is needed with youth, one in which we own the full responsibility for the state of the planet, and then work more closely with youth to build new lifestyles and peaceful societies. For the countries that oppose, and some will, they in turn will have to be opposed firmly and openly. The issue brief we are launching today identifies some of the obstacles for building this kind of partnership with youth. The paper explores how the perception of youth in many parts of the world is often negative and highly gendered. Young men are considered troublemakers and young girls victims, rendering them powerless and sidelining both young men and women. This misguided perception needs to change. Fortunately, momentum is building for new ways to think about intergenerational collaboration. I am honored that we have such a wonderful group of speakers with us here today who are at the forefront of this discussion and who will be sharing with us their recommendations for the way forward. Jimena, over to you.
Okay, good. I wanted to see him. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us. We're so delighted and happy that you're now IPI's president and that this topic is also dear to your heart. First, before we go to our speakers, I really want to thank our partners, particularly the Global Challenges Foundation, for supporting our work, as well as the members of the core group, the Office of the UN's, the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, the Office of Partnerships, the Network of Young Peace Builders, the UN Population Fund, the Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. Thank you, everyone, for being here, for being so supportive of this process. You know, we want to start with a metaphor, because I think that right now, what engaging youth in global governance cannot longer be an afterthought or a luxury. It's really a necessity if we want to keep a rule-based system. And the main issue is that the UN and its main structures are like a ruler, right? They're straight, they're hierarchical, they have a linear path, whereas youth movements in general are horizontal, much more connected. And so how can we make both of these interact when they are completely different in nature, in organizational status, in ways of communications, in the way they interact with each other. So it's actually quite difficult to make this partnership work, but it is possible and it's needed. So the issue brief that we're launching today does specify key recommendations on how we can build this partnership and how we can advance this topic forward. And so the first question that we're going to be asking our fantastic group of speakers, who we have Ambassador Inga Ron, a permanent representative from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who now serves in the Security Council. We have Ms. Johanna Lissinger-Pitts, Ambassador for Stockholm Plus 50. We have Nisreen Al-Saim, the chair of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group and chair of the Sudan Youth Organization. We have Ms. Disha Sarkar, Ambassador for the International Youth Conference from India. And soon we'll have Selwyn Hart, Special Advisor for the SG on climate action. So the first question we have for you, and this we want you to answer as a tweet kind of answer, so a minute each, is what is the greatest opportunity that you see for increasing youth participation in global governance? What needs to change to make this happen? Ambassador Ronda, would you like to go first?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. This is exciting. Now, I believe that within the UN system, the ECOSOC Youth Forum remains a great opportunity for young people to engage with decision makers. However, we do need to have a change of mindset. We need to listen to our young people. They think and see differently, and that is a good thing. We need to include young people in every space, so not just a dedicated space for them. We need to have them on our panels. We need to include them in the same way we moved toward gender parity. We need to ensure that there is a youth perspective on all our panels. They can teach us to see anew.
Great, thank you so much. Nisreen, you're next.
Well, I think I answered this question many times in different ways and different engagements, let me say. But my answer remains the same, because unless we see a progress on my answer, then it will remain the same. Because claiming rights, and if we did not get the right we want, it doesn't mean we stop claiming the rights. It means we push more to get our rights. Well, we don't need to be included because we are already there. We need to actually take the lead, which is something further than just to be included. I can give many examples of that, but specifically on when it comes to peace and climate change, young people are already in the front lines. Young people are already peace builders. Young people are already fighting against climate change and showing leadership. But how much recognition they get for their parts, how much actual positions they get in different governments, different parliaments, different positions. I mean, this is something I want to challenge even you as an International Peace Institute. How many under 35? I don't want to see. I don't want to say employees, but a senior position employees do you have in your own institute? This is not something simple. It's not something we just say. It's something we should actually have an action on, and it's not something away from our hand. We're not talking about only countries or politicians. We are talking about our own institutes that we are working. A very big question always come around is why we have youth-led organizations. And the answer was very clear from different experiences, that the multi-generation organizations never ever reached the expectation young people have, never have the enough spaces for us, and never give us the leadership. That's why we started to create our own spaces. But enough is enough. Now we should go back to our normal situation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Ambassador Lissinger, you're next.
Thank you very much. And for the greatest opportunities and what we need to do differently, I think very short that we need to work together to establish those structures that are meaningful and inclusive. And I think that ensures to help for us to use the full potential of youth as change makers and mobilizing and identifying and implementing solutions. And I think to do so, we need to also move away a little bit from youth as one category. It's a very diverse category. And I think we have a tendency sometimes to put everything in the same, but to base that on also diversity of the population. Look at what are the enablers, where in our work we have seen education coming up quite a lot as an important enabler, and moving also away from, I think, youth policy to youth in policy. And I will come back to that later also. Thank you.
Great. Disha, joining us from India. Hi.
Hello. Firstly, my regards to the esteemed panelists and the revered guests. So, addressing to the question of opportunities, I would like to say that though I may sound like a sadist here, but COVID-19 has emerged as an opener of avenues for opportunities. The paradigm shift of virtual mode of communication has included youth from all over the world to take part in such kind of interactions today. And this shows that it's no more a privilege to be enjoyed by the elite class only. It is giving us an opportunity to talk from any part of the world. So I think this is a change that we are willing to see. And apart from that, I would like to thank the International Peace Institute also today, because this intergenerational dialogue in the last event also I have joined, and plus this I have been called as a panelist. So this, as a youth, I feel privileged that I have been able to share the panel with such revered people, and at least you all are giving us a chance to hear our views and comments. So this is what we want. We want a participation and a meaningful participation. So that's, I think, opportunity that I would like to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Disha, and thank you also for bringing COVID-19. And it's good to hear that it has also been an opener and a catalyzer for change. Thank you very much. The paper that we're launching today speaks of how youth have been at the forefront, both in the climate change scenario, but also in the youth peace and security world. But these movements emerge from very different moments and focus, whereas the peace and security, youth peace and security movement really emerged as part of a movement within the UN, and where the Security Council play a role. The climate change movement has emerged almost as a counter movement from the status quo, a counter movement from the UN and here and much more vertical institutions demanding change, demanding ambition. So how can these two movements, in a way, how can we build more synergies between youth working on climate, between youth and others working on peace, and how can these, by joining forces between the peace and the climate, how can we actually increase exponential and transformative change in both areas? So with that, my first question will go to Nisreen. In the last 6 months, you have chaired the UN SG's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. You have briefed the Security Council and have the unique exceptional role of being part of a high-level discussion. So in your view, what's the next step to institutionalize the voice of youth at the UN, particularly when it comes to climate, youth, peace, and security? And before you answer, I want colleagues in Zoom and in other platforms that are listening to us today to use the chat, to use our Twitter accounts, to use our LinkedIn accounts, to use to post questions, to post comments. So please, we want this to be a global conversation. Nisreen, over to you. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, this is it's a forecasted answer. Actually, it's not an answer that I have a definite know of how are we going to do that. But the youth advisory group age is only I think 7 months from now, or even less. Our period ends in December, and all over the group, and also the climate action team within the UN Secretary General's office, also the Youth Envoy office, all of us are working on how can we, I don't want to say leave a legacy, but on how can we move on in a better situation with a better structures, with more inclusion, and with a better planning, let me say, for young people engagement. Um, it's very good that we already have the youth advisory group. It's very good that we already started to have people speaking, young people speaking at the youth at the Security Council and so on. But then what's next? This is the question we always have. We don't have any follow-up plans of our events, and also our different participations that we speak at. We don't normally have any action points coming out of the topics that we speak about and so on. There is no, normally there is nobody adopt or adapt to changes that we are making inside of the sessions. The outcomes of the sessions always remains in Zoom. Sometimes it's moved to a publication like the one you are launching today. But on the ground and on the within the UN system, things are still, let me say, blur for us. I know that Mr. Antonio Guterres is putting a huge effort in including young people within the UN system, within the different engagements of the UN itself, and so on. But then how sustainable this engagement is, how to give all of the ideas that we have in our minds and we bring up in the Zooms and the events a ground to actually fall in, and a body to implement it. This is the question that we are all thinking about at the point where we actually walk the talk that we are speaking here in the different events.
Great, thank you so much. The question of what's next and how to walk the talk and how to move from rhetoric to action are all the right questions. And I think we have the right speakers in the room to start answering these questions. So next we have Ambassador Rhonda King from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who serves in the council. So currently, there is a unique alignment in the Security Council where there's both positive recognition of youth as well as much more friendlier environment on climate change than a few months ago. So what do you think is the Council's role in increasing the interlinkages between climate and peace and climate and prevention? And how can the Council be more receptive to the priorities of youth, and particularly those already living the consequences of climate as a risk multiplier in conflict settings? Ambassador, over to you.
Well, thank you for the question. As your preamble alluded, Council dynamics have indeed shifted. And after much resistance, as you know, to addressing the issue in the past, currently 12 of the 15 Council members, 3 of whom are permanent members, are now unified on the need for the Council to explore and better address how climate change related risks imperil security. That is no easy feat. So that's one very good thing. Now, the more supportive environment, therefore, has led to the recent establishment of the informal expert group of members of the Security Council on Climate and Security. It's called the IEG. Its objective is to assist the Council to achieve a more comprehensive and systematic approach to climate security risks. In recent meetings, the Security Council noted that 70% of the climate vulnerable countries are also the most fragile politically and economically. This has significant implications for how the Council conducts its work. Many young people live in fragile and conflict-affected countries. So, for example, we see how issues related to YPS and climate-related risks converge in countries and regions in Africa, where persons under the age of 35 account for 3/4 of the population. It is for this reason that we call for the accelerated implementation of all 3 resolutions on YPS, and that will address some of the concerns of Nisreen. You know, we talk, but we don't do. So the inclusion of youth-centered actions in country-specific mandates, the expanded adoption of YPS action plans across all conflict-affected countries, and the full and meaningful participation of youth, including young women, in climate security and development action. It becomes therefore imperative that we mainstream the YPS concerns in actions to address climate-related security risk. This will, I think you will agree, only be achieved with consistent and meaningful participation and leadership at the local, regional, national, regional, and multilateral levels. And I will conclude quickly with saying to Nisreen, the IAG, of which I'm a member, intends to engage closely with to receive briefings in an informal setting with youth experts like Nisreen on these matters. So that's high up on our agenda, and we have been encouraged by the Secretary General to do so. So with that, I cede the floor.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And you brought out the resolutions, and you know, one of the things that kind of instigated this program was the fact that in the latest YPS resolution, we didn't get a reference to climate change, right? And there's not been a climate change document since 2011. So I'm sorry to put you on the spot, and you don't have to answer.
Okay.
But
yes, but that had we had that just months later,
yeah,
we might have been successful. And additionally, we had aimed the IAG to have a climate change resolution, but that too, we have postponed to a later date and a more friendly climate. So we haven't given up. Do not give up on us. We have a climate security friendly environment. So we will keep on advocating. We will keep on. So don't give up. Don't give up on us.
We want to support you, actually.
Yes.
We want to support you because in the fall, there is a window of opportunity to achieve this. And I think that we call on youth, we call on every youth in this world.
Raise your voices.
Exactly, to raise your voices, because the opportunity to have something very strong in the fall has taken more than 10 years to be here. So please help us achieve that. And with that, I think that Selwyn, I think your ears were ringing, because I think it kind of like makes sense that for you to go next. You've played many hats. We've negotiated together the Paris Agreement. You've been the ambassador of your country, Barbados, and now you're the ASG for climate action. You know how rigid the rules of participation at the UN are, and how tough it is to change their working methods. Can you envision a UNFCCC and a UN that's much more inclusive of youth and others?
Thank you, and good morning to you, Jimena, and it's really good to see so many familiar friends and faces. And yes, and yesterday I had the honor to speak at an event that was hosted by the UN Foundation, and one of the key takeaways and that I heard from young people all over the world is that they need a seat at the table. They need a seat at the table when decisions are being made on their behalf. And there is no issue that demands the full involvement and participation more in terms of a voice in a seat than on the issue of climate change. And we know what the rules are of these intergovernmental bodies, be it the UNFCCC or the UN. So I think in the interim, we have to find creative ways of ensuring that the voices of young people are reflected in the decisions and the outcomes that we take on issues related to international peace and security, but also on climate change. And this needs to be attacked at all levels. One of the points that I made yesterday was that young people in their own communities, but also should be engaging with local governments, with regional and state governments, with the federal governments on issues related to COVID recovery spending. Because COVID recovery spending and how spending on pandemic recovery will influence the individual national climate goals of all of our countries. If leaders, for example, invest in coal or make massive investments in fossil fuels, it could place the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement out of reach. And all that we're seeing tells us that investments in renewable energies, for example, deliver 3 times more jobs than investments in fossil fuels. So I wouldn't only look at it from the perspective of the international and multilateral processes. I think youth involvement in their own countries is absolutely essential. And finally, in terms of creative ways of engaging young people, about a year ago, the Secretary General decided to create a youth advisory group. Nisreen chaired that group in its first year. And we have these 7, brilliant, energetic, engaged young people who have been brought in to provide advice on the Secretary General's strategy for climate strategy, both in terms of its formulation, but more importantly, in terms of its implementation. So we need to be creative in the interim, but ultimately, it is absolutely essential that we give young people a seat at the table and a voice when decisions that impact on them are being decided.
Correct. Thank you so much, Selwyn, and thank you so much for opening the question to the local and regional levels. But you're not off the hook, because you do need to answer us how we can get youth in the conference halls, in the negotiation rooms of the UNFCCC, and to avoid what happened in Madrid, to look at the COP in the UK and the pre-COP as much more inclusive processes where youth priorities can be put at the table and not be ad hoc. At the local, regional, and national levels, we've identified that some of the main obstacles that block youth participation is that they're seen as troublemakers. They are expected to work for free, and there's no supportive structures nor mentorship. For example, the last time there was a youth sustainable development strategy was in the 90s. It has not been updated. There is no intergovernmental framework on youth since the 1990s. The strongest reference of youth in the UN is the YPS, and it sits in the Security Council, which is such a narrow mandate. So this is why we've invited Ambassador Johanna Lissinger, who's leading the Stockholm Plus 50 process, because we feel it's such an important and strong opportunity to build perhaps a new strategy on youth focused on sustainable development, which would be a lot more holistic and a lot more creative and much more and needed for this moment. So Ambassador Johanna, thank you so much for joining us. What do you think? What's your vision for Stockholm Plus 50 and particularly on this topic of youth? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. And I think as Said said in the beginning, and I think others also said, we are at a time where almost a quarter of today's population is between 10 and 24 years old. So I think anyone who is planning a larger COP, a conference, meeting, future policies, have a strong responsibility to actually include the voices of such a large group, because they are actually the ones who will live with those policies for years to come. And my government, of course, is very much in the planning process of working towards a Stockholm Plus 50. And as we are that, we are, I think, committed to work towards promoting and strengthening structures of involving youth in a very meaningful way. And I think in my work for the time being, I'm kind of looking at this from two different aspects. One is more of the structures, finding the method, finding the structures of how do we involve youth. But the other one is also the more policy related. How do we make sure that, let's say, if Stockholm Plus 50 is about looking at sustainable recovery in harmony with nature, how do we make sure that we phrase the questions, that we find the narrative that is relevant for the youth, so that we already from beginning making sure that we are asking the right questions. And that's also one part of the process of shaping the questions and framing the issues in a way that we are working towards an outcome that is of high relevance for the youth. So if I would start maybe with the first one, which is more on the structure side, we are, and Selwyn I think was worth talking to this also, but we are of course looking to learn from other processes, not reinventing the wheel, but a lot of things has been ongoing the last couple of years on finding structures to involve the youth. How can we build on those? From a purely national level, we have worked very closely. We have the fortunate to have a National Council for Youth Consultations. We have worked with them, asked them questions. We are trying to, as much as possible, to prioritize to also actively participate, not just giving an intervention, but participate in the whole meetings of the youth assembly leading up to UNEA, to really learn, what is on the priority and what is on the agenda for the youth, to try to also involve that. And 1972 was quite groundbreaking when it came to establishing structure for involvement of civil society. And I think in the dialogue that I have with many colleagues around the world now, I feel a pressure of many making the parallel to, can we do something similar for the youth constituency 50 years later? And that is of course a huge task, but a task that we is interested in having a dialogue with many, I think, who are participated here also. But there are high expectations, and this is also not, I think, for the reasons that you gave and with your metaphor in the beginning of the kind of linear and more fluid structures of youth engagements, it's not an easy task. I mean, on the policy side, let me maybe come back to what I said in the beginning on not just having youth policy, but youth in policy, and trying to see how do we phrase those questions. And in our work with a Stockholm Plus 50, sustainable consumption and production patterns, green jobs for youth has been issues mentioned, and these ideas actually comes from some of the youth discussions we have already had. So that is a way of, I think, already trying to consult as much as we can with the youth. We have to do, I think, better to also involve the South. And I think listening to this discussion is quite interesting for us. Issues that also comes up in those consultations are innovation, making the link between everyday life and environment, which is also, I think, interesting. And then I have to say, having spent some of my life in the UNFCCC process, I'm taking the liberty of just very quickly also have a thought on how we involve, and in that sense. And I think it's 2 years ago now, we have since long have youth representatives in our delegation. But I think we made a change at least 2 years ago or something, where that youth participation was not just at the COP, which it used to be, but actually making them a part of the all year round work. So when we develop, our brief for coming to Bonn or virtual meetings or to Glasgow, making sure that in our position from Sweden and in our brief, we have already integrated the voice of youth. So while we also need to work to have the voice of youth at the table, that is also actually a way to actually make sure that you have the voice integrated. So I think that's where we are. And moving ahead towards Stockholm Plus 50, the youth voices will be important, and we will happy to continue this kind of dialogue. And we have high ambitions and much to learn and need to work closely with everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much. There are high expectations, but I think that the timing of the conference could not be better. After COVID, it does feel like a very special moment in the calendar to come together to reflect on the 1972 and these 50 years and to really strongly chart that vision forward. So thank you so much. We'll be looking forward to supporting you in that path. Next, last but not least, Disha from India. From your perspective, why is it important for the young of peace builders to have a climate lens and the work of climate activists to have a peace lens? And you've heard all of these different positions now. What is your sense of the conversation?
Firstly, thank you for the question, and I'm actually very enlightened by the kind of discussion we already had. And as you have already said, that there are two parallel movements, huge movements. One is climate action and the other is establishment of peace going on parallelly. However, the need for intertwining them is the main concern. We see that most of the organizations or youth organizations are very reluctant to combine this kind of movements together and work for a collective goal. Because of what I have come across is the kind of funding that they have are very specific. While talking with the organizations, they say that the eligibility criteria of various fundings are very confined to particular dominions. For example, if there is funding in case of climate change, then it is confined to only climate organizations which are working in the field of climate. So I believe that there should be a more generalized view in the funding regard. And again, to add to this, in case of funding, what we have already seen, and I have already read through your publication also, that in case of funding, the youth are not trusted upon. So in that case, something that I would like to talk about is about the monitoring of the funding. The organizations cannot just limit their duties to just funding the organizations, but a proper monitoring and evaluation of the process has to be done. If you do not trust the youth, then you can just evaluate their progress. You can keep a check balance of that, and then how the funds are being utilized, that is the way I think a proper reporting from time to time will help in this regard. Apart from that, another thing that I would like to say is the implication of climate change is almost prevalent in almost all of the parts of the world. However, in case of peace, I have seen that it is very localized. And in case of climate change, we have been able to develop a network, though not institutionalized, but a network of youth workers who are working in the field of climate change. However, in case of peace, it's more of a governmental pursuit. We believe that negotiations are at the level of government, and there is no dialogue in case of people to people. So this is something that I would like to emphasize upon, that people to people connect. And in the post-war situation also, the rehabilitation process has to be more focused upon the behavioral change of the people. And in this regard, the behavioral change will come only when this inclusion of peace or inclusion of any such social evil that is prevalent will be included in the elementary level education. We see that peace or youth in peace is just a pursuit at the higher level, like of master degree level or doctorate level, but that is not a part of the curriculum at the elementary level. So if the children are made aware about their about their responsibilities towards each other, towards other countries, from a very young age, then I think that will be a very game changer in this regard. And lastly, we have seen that history is evident that common enemies are always the greatest unifiers. Be it in the case of COVID, we see that countries are coming together, sharing vaccines. So why not in case of peace? Why not in case of climate change? So this is what I would like to say. And in case of youth inclusion, I think the panelists have already spoken well enough. The most important thing is about remuneration. We youth look upon to a career. I have been asked this question that, okay, you are pursuing this is a passion, but what about your career? Do this earn you anything? So this is a question that I want to answer. In the next 10 years, I have to answer something regarding my financial stability also. So this is something I would like to bring into highlight. So much.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing the issue of funding, which is, I think, one of the biggest obstacles for youth engagement and for sustainable youth engagement, particularly in the South, particularly at the grassroots level. There is an expectation, a very big assumption that youth should work for free. How do we change that? And even for UN internships, we were speaking with that it's still very predominantly northern countries that get the UN internships because they're able to sustain themselves. So how do we open up this funding, the peace building fund? How do we really address the issue of funding so that youth have the resources and have the time to learn and work together in all of these processes? And also thank you for bringing the differences between peace being very localized and climate change being a much more universal issue. So we now shift to 1 minute recommendations from each of you. So what can we do together, and what can we do in the next few months together to change what's not working, to build transformative change? Ambassador Rhonda King.
I'm already unmuted. You know, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but for me, the thing is very simple. As I said at the very outset, that we need to listen to young people, include young people, respect and incorporate their perspectives in the decisions we take. And how do we do that? They do need, our young people do need a seat at the decision-making table. So let us commit here, those of us who are in decision-making positions, that any panel, remember that does this panel reflect the view of our world? We are very conscious of it, where gender parity is concerned. Now we need to shift. I've been saying it when I was president of ECOSOC. Every single panel we must consider. So between now and then, and we do lots of panels at the United Nations. Every day we have to pull together a panel. So let us make the commitment that on every issue, no matter what it is, do we have a representative body of people pronouncing on this issue? Importantly, do we have the youth perspective? So that's my, and I want to say quickly though, and we have an opportunity, and I'm going away with this, in climate and security, in the newly formed IEG on the Security Council, to ensure that we champion youth and gender responsive action. And that's my commitment to you for the rest of my tenure on the Security Council. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that very strong commitment. It's wonderful to see that the leadership of a strong woman in the Security Council committing to this. Will be delighted to follow your footsteps and to follow your lead in your tenure in the Security Council. Said, what is your recommendation?
Well, there's a deep paradox, and I think everyone's bringing this out, and you framed it well, Jimena, that essentially the leadership we need to listen to is a grassroots leadership. And by definition, if you empower an individual, they don't want to be led, they want to lead. The question is, there's no agreement at grassroots on who leads. And in one way, it's paradoxical because we need to listen to leaders who emerge by dint of their extraordinary skill and their extraordinary fearlessness. It's not everyone who can do this, a very limited number of people. But how you integrate them into a vertical structure that doesn't want to be told, that considers dissenting opinion dangerous. In many countries, the very people you need to hear on climate change also speak about other things, about poverty, about corruption, about malfeasance. Many of them are put in prison, many of them are silenced. And you have this obvious problem here in how you connect the two. We, our generation, have to grow up, essentially. We have to be more mature. We have to be able to take dissent. We have to create the space open. We have to admit fault. Not easy. And I've also been in the Security Council, and admitting fault doesn't come easy to members of the Security Council. When I joined, I was told there was God Almighty in the Security Council and nothing in between. So maybe His Holiness the Pope is somewhere there. So these are intensely difficult issues. At the heart of it also is there's a required confrontation. There will be a required confrontation. It's not comfortable. It's dangerous, and we have to accept that at some stage there's some countries that are not going to cede, where we'll see continued peace and security related conflicts and an unwillingness to change because of the climate change dilemmas that we're in. So I'm delighted. I mean, this is an extraordinary discussion, and all the panelists are just outstanding. And I hope this is something that we can continue to host here at IPI.
Thank you. And thank you so much for bringing that paradox of confrontation and joint action. And us well, I don't know if we're the grown-ups, but the older generation needs to grow up, and it's okay, and we'll have to be okay with feeling uncomfortable in asking these questions, in changing the rules of procedure, of participation, because as I said at the beginning, it's no longer a luxury, but a necessity. With that, Selwyn, would you like to go next?
Not a problem. Not a problem. And it's always good to come after two very distinguished speakers, especially one, a very strong and brilliant Caribbean woman as well. But before answering your question, I wanted to go back to a point that you made earlier on this absence of a youth focus. And while there are some gaps, the UN has a youth strategy, a very ambitious youth strategy that has these 5 priorities around engagement, participation, and advocacy, around informed and health, around economic empowerment, peace and resilience building, and youth and human rights. And we have the Office of the Youth Envoy, who's very focused in the implementation of the strategy. So a lot is happening. The point that I'm making is that a lot is happening. However, a lot more needs to be done and can be done. So to answer your question, these next few months on the climate front will be absolutely critical as we head towards the COP. And the decisions that will be taken not only at the COP itself, but before the COP around issues of recovery spending, around some of the issues that will be discussed in the context of the G7 and the G20 meetings. some of the thematic summits on energy and food systems. All of these events, the Convention on Biological Diversity, all of these events we really need to have young people engaged, not only getting a pass to attend a UN meeting, but engage in the positions that their countries take. And I cannot overstress the need for young people to be given an opportunity to inform policy at the local and national level in their respective countries. So that country X, so that Guatemala or a Barbados or St. Vincent and the Grenadines, whoever is speaking on behalf of that country, whoever is negotiating on behalf of that country, that person, that individual, that diplomat has a position, a national position that is informed by youth input at the national level. I believe that that is the way that we really get strong outcomes across all of these global processes over the course of the coming months that reflect the priorities and interests of young people.
Right. Thank you so much. And we do love Jay, and we do love the Youth 2030 strategy. It's just that my point was that it's not yet fully intergovernmental, right? So there is still a lot of work to do. And perhaps one of the biggest outcomes of Stockholm Plus 50 could be that call of including youth in the NDC process, in delegations, and in the work of not only peace building, but also in the sustainable frameworks that are now being built by the RCO offices. So really mainstream the capacity of youth. But we also noted that it's been actually quite good that we haven't had a top-down youth strategy, because in some countries that would put youth at risk. And Said mentioned the protection risks of youth in countries where youth are not welcomed. So this type of youth national strategies and local strategies need to be really built at a bottom-up approach so that they protect and empower youth instead of restricting them and restraining them. So it's a double-edged sword, and we do need to keep those risks in mind. Disha, would you like to come in, and then Johanna, and then Nisreen? Disha?
Yes. Something that I would like to say here is we are constantly talking about a bottom to up approach. This is very true. Like from the grassroots level, it has to go up to the national and then international level. But however, another thing that I would like to highlight here is there is a very important role that the youth leaders, or who are selected or elected amongst from the grassroots level, they have a huge responsibility. It is often seen that maybe in case of my country, India, I have seen people who are actually representing my country, India, in the international tables, in the decision-making process. However, once they reach that level, the work they should do back in their hometowns, the work that they should do back in their grassroots level is negligible. The people who are actually working in the field and the people who are representing us on the decision making table, there is a huge disparity between the two. Once you reach at the top, they do not look back. So we have to come back to the grassroots level. We have to come back and see the people we represent. We have to come back to them. This is the problem of our electoral system, our political system. This is something that is already enrooted in our systems. However, this is something that I would like to highlight upon. We have to come back to our roots and work in the field where we belong to, not just take the seat on the table and talk about this and that, but also come back to the field. Yes, that's what I would like to emphasize.
Thank you so much for bringing that very big gap between those having the voice and those doing the work. And how do we make sure that those being elected to have that voice are truly representative of the communities, of the most vulnerable, and of and I think that's really, really important when youth are selected rather than elected. right? So how can we also include that in our upcoming discussions? Johanna, you're next.
Thank you very much. I think I had 3 short recommendations. One was very much feeling what we just said. It's making the connection between providing the safe space on local, regional, and global level, and then the feedback loop back. The funding issue, I think, comes up in every discussions I have with youth. So this is something that I think is a very strong signal to all of us. And the last one is, as you, I think, put it, creating that structure for mainstreaming youth into our decision making, and making sure that that also involves the feedback loop back. It's not just listening, consulting. We have lots of youth consultations, but also finding the way and fora to feedback. What do we actually do with the messages, and how do we take them into consideration in our work and decision making? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Nisbeen?
Yes, I want to start what we said earlier, and I will volunteer my time, as I always do, to make a proper action plan for the inclusion of young people in peace and security and climate change issues. But this needs faith from the members of the group themselves, and I wish if members of the group, this group, and also of the audience can actually adopt this project and say, well, we will do it with you. I'm ready. I know there's a lot of people ready. Selwyn is always late, but he's always also ready. and there's a lot of people who are very much willing to give help and support to such a project. Still, we need institutional adoption for that. So if one institute in the audience, in the group, whatever people hearing the live, in the Facebook, in the Twitter, in the Instagram said, we raise the flag, we will adopt this project, then I think our efforts had come into a very fruitful action in front. And also, before I close, I see some reactions on the chat and also in the Q&A box. So I just want to give some reflections on it. So Catherine from the Ban Ki-moon Center spoke about institutional development, like reporting processes, financial management, monitoring and evaluation, and international body organizing, provide trainings and capacity buildings for youth-led organization and youth-led movement, and also the youth and climate, YPS and climate movement and so on. Well, institutional development is always very important, because especially for youth-led organization, we get into the loop of you can't access funds because you don't have a strong institutional system. You can have a strong institutional system because you don't have funds. How can you finance this institutional system? Then again, you can have access funds because you don't have institutional systems, but then you can't have institutional systems if you did not access funds, and so on. So yes, it's very important, yet donors very much rely on to very tangible and very measurable impacts when they put money or they put funding for different activities. So taking care about raising the awareness, building the capacity of the organizations and so on gets a very small attention on that. We have many experiences, not only in Sudan, not only in Africa, but internationally. Whenever we apply for a project to build the institutional capacity of the organizations, we don't get a pleasant answer. Sorry, Ahim, I will take a bit longer because there's a lot of reactions we did not comment on. There is Tariq Mohadin, and he had a question, or she, sorry, I'm not sure if it's a he or she, and the question is inspired from the document and the publication itself. What practical steps should the government and multilateral institution consider in order to shift towards inclusive governance system that involved and empower youth? How can we synergize between youth, climate peace, and strengthen in specific terms policies actions? Well, my very short answer for this is we need to have more young politicians, unfortunately. fortunately and unfortunately too, because decision making and policy making is a hybrid between the scientific part. This is the most ideal situation where scientists come together with politicians to present a policy or a document or a strategy. Unfortunately, in many countries, especially the developing countries where scientists doesn't get a lot of seats on the table, it's only politicians who make the policies, and it doesn't always succeed because they don't always have the technical know-how of the topic. So what we need to do is we need to have more young politicians with more diverse backgrounds. So we need to have chemists as a politicians. We need to have engineers as a politicians. We need to have political science and economical science and so on as a politicians in order to have this synergy. I know I already told you I will take more time. Sorry. And this is the very much ideal situation that we wish. My last comment and reflection will be on from the Generation for Peace in Jordan. It's not, this is the question you ask is doesn't have one approach to answer. There's a lot of approaches, and every country, every situation, every organization have their own projection for that. You just need to pick the right projection for your organization or your country or your region. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry that I took so long.
Oh, thank you. And actually, thank you so much. A two-finger from Ambassador Rhonda King. Go ahead.
Yes, no, those I'm about to leave. I wanted to say thank you very much for a very engaging, interesting, inspiring, exciting discussion. And I wanted to leave one concrete example of what leadership and determination can do. At my mission, a tiny mission, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have 70% of my staff. The age group ranges between 28 and 35. 70% and 80% of us are female, with all female leadership. And that was done by determination and simply pushing to have the voice, because we are a young nation with a young population. So we pushed, and that's what we have. And I'm not suggesting that that's a great model, because we do need a balance, because we don't want our male colleagues to not have opportunities. But I'm just showing you that determination and leadership can do that. And with that, I exit, and I wish you all the best for the concluding moments of the session. Thank you very much. Peace profound to you all.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you. So as you've noticed, there's a lot of questions from of the chat, and I know we only have a few more minutes left. So I do want to bring up that question for other speakers, or how can the synergies between youth, climate, and peace be strengthened in specific policy actions? Does anyone want to take the respond to that?
If I may, yes.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Disha, and then Johanna.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So a thing that I would like to emphasize here is we need a clear and segmented view of the systematic framework that each individual, as a climate activist or as a youth working in the field of peace building, we need a segmentation of the duties and rights, and a systematic framework has to be outlined. Then we can understand that, okay, these are our responsibilities and these are our duties towards our job, and accordingly we can move ahead. So systematic framework is what I would like to emphasize upon. And secondly, another important thing is about segregation of the data. We have data available, but the impact of any kind of like a war or impact of any climate change on a specific community is not very evident. Like we have a very generalized kind of data, so mostly I would like to emphasize that we need a segmented data where we understand the impact of various social evils on each community, and accordingly we can compare that which community needs more representation, and accordingly we can bring people from the grassroots level of those specific communities, and then we can make a negotiation on that regard. Here language can be a barrier, because we see the inclination towards English is something that we cannot deny. So language can be a barrier. You have to be ready to accept the challenges that come along, but that will bring negotiation at the real way, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Disha. Wonderful. Ambassador Johanna?
Thank you very much. Just very short, and I'm quite inspired by the conversation I have with a youth representative who I know is listening to this also yesterday, and she approached it in a way through looking at the livelihood perspective and looking at the synergies of climate peace in relation to livelihood and how do we approach that. So I think that's one aspect. And myself, coming more from the environment climate side, I also, having listened to this, see that we can actually learn quite a lot from each other on how different areas work differently with youth involvement. So that's maybe another one. And just very briefly on one of the other questions that was also, what can we do from policymakers, governments? And I do think that actually having the structure on a national level to already there involve youth in the decision making also then allows for a more and better integrated influence from youth at the global level. So that is also one comment. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Selwyn, there's a question on how can we cut through the disinformation related to climate change?
Thanks. Well, I honestly believe that increasingly, and if there's one silver lining, the disinformation around climate change is not as bad as it was many years ago. There is growing acceptance, and I would say a global consensus. I don't believe I'm saying this, that climate change is real, and that we need an urgent and ambitious response to the climate crisis. So I think that this is less of a problem. I know that in certain countries and in certain regions, this might still be an issue, but I believe that it's less of a problem. That being said, we need voices across governments, across business, across civil society, young people to continue to speak up and to advocate. I know someone said that young people are sometimes seen as troublemakers. I don't see that being a problem at all. We need troublemakers. I'm not calling Nisreen a troublemaker, but we need my good friend Nisreen, but we need her voice. We need young people to hold the feet of policymakers to the fire. We need them to be strong advocates in their communities, at home, and also globally on all of these issues, because it is their future that we are imperiling by lack of action and by a lack of ambition. So we need them to continue to be advocates for the highest level of ambition. Unfortunately, I have to drop off as well to attend a meeting, but I just want to say, Nisreen, I am definitely all in with your project. We have done some really great work together in your role presiding over the Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group. And but that is only the first step. It's only the first step. We really need to do a lot more to ensure that young people have that seat at the table, not only for discussion, but on decision making as well. But it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to working with all of you colleagues.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us, Selwyn. It's always lovely to hear you.
Always a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Yeah. And taking up that idea of Nisreen on the project, I think it's a very good call for all of us to share and to put as a goal in the future on the what's next, to have that body that really brings youth, peace, and climate action as in an institutionalized format. So now we are in the concluding remarks, and for that, I want to give the floor to Anya from the Global Challenges Foundation, who have generously supported this project, and then our IPI's president will close the event. Anya?
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Such a beautiful group of people here today. It's been great listening in to all of your insights and all of your recommendations. I have like 1 million pages of notes that we will now try to follow up. And I think that it's safe to say that all of us are on board, Nisreen. We do want to formulate an action plan, and we do want to follow up. So my sincerest thanks to all of you for contributing to this very, very important topic that is very close to my heart. And it's been such a delight to also work with you, Jimena, and all of the core group. And I think it's safe to say that a lot of the things that we've heard today are also echoed in the fantastic report that you've compiled, and that I really encourage all of you to look through, because that will be the basis, together with the conclusions of today, of our continued work. And I just want to assure you all that we are very committed to taking all of the recommendations and policy ideas from today forward, and really create a momentum for the fall, for the Security Council, for the COP, for Stockholm +50. And we're also very eager to support all of you in decision-making positions to make the best out of all of the great events and upcoming opportunities that we have in front of us. So thank you so much for convening today and for all of your insights. We really are excited to continue the work and keeping up the engagement and torch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya. Thank you. Say?
Well, it's been fascinating. This is my first panel as president of IPI, and I have to say it's amazing. When I was High Commissioner for Human Rights, I would often meet grassroots leaders. They didn't need me to tell them they were leaders. I knew they were leaders. They didn't even have to say anything. They would be sitting there, and I knew they were leaders. And I think Disha's point is absolutely right. You know, there are some, regrettably, that will posture but don't have the grassroots supports, don't have the connection to on the peace and security side or the climate change side. And I think what you were saying, Disha, also about disaggregated data, yes, because it needs organization and planning. And Nisreen, your points, and I'm going to what Selwyn said, you know, it is essential that you irritate us. If you're not irritating us and making us feel uncomfortable, then you're not doing your job, you know. We don't want compliant youth. We want a youth that's agitating for us to do better and for us to be persuaded that we have to do better. And I think post Glasgow will take real stock of where we are with the NDCs, and then this discussion should continue. But I think all of you are just amazing, and thank you, Johanna, for joining us from Sweden as well, and Anya for sponsoring this. And really, I like to think, being a professor, that I don't really learn very much anymore, but I have to admit that I am learning. So it's okay to be vulnerable sometimes if you're a middle-aged person or an elderly person. Thank you so much, really outstanding.